Welcome back. Super Typhoon Yolanda is definitely the worst disaster of the year, and sadly the experts warn it could happen again. So we must prepare, and not just by improving the way we respond to disasters or with better weather forecasting tools, but by changing the way we live altogether. It's not that we haven't been warned, and with dozens of storms battering the country every year, it's not that we're inexperienced either. The problem is, we never seem to learn, or perhaps want to. Call it prophetic, but many years ago, you and your colleagues predicted all this would happen. This is pretty much an I told you so scenario, isn't it?
What's the hottest spot? That center in the Pacific Ocean above West Papua and Guam that fuels cyclogenesis, the birth of storms that hit the Philippines. What's the hottest spot? Here. Therefore, what's the highest sea level? Here. We know all these things. Now, back then, there were indications that we were headed there, but how many businesses have actually, how many cities have actually said, okay, let's do this?
Laurie Tan and the World Wildlife Fund have been caricatured by skeptics as prophets of gloom, but in the wake of recent calamities, their predictions have been proven true.
We looked at the Tacloban airport and said, this is in trouble. What did they do? They built a seawall. Did the seawall help stop the storm surge? No. So, many people have not gone through mind shift. There has to be a change in your understanding of what will happen.
Tacloban, of course, is not the only city at risk. The World Wildlife Fund and other environmental agencies have forewarned most coastal communities and even inland cities. Retrofit infrastructure and rethink land use. Suffer the consequences of rising sea levels and the deadly storm surges they bring. All this destruction is an opportunity to rebuild and remap those places in the country, isn't it?
It is. For example, when we talk about how do you respond to the last typhoon, I tell people that there are three possible responses. One, for areas that are not seriously damaged, give them a boost in the pants and they're up and running. Two, areas like Tacloban that are flattened, leveled, reconstruction. You're talking 10 years. I mean, learn from Banda Aceh, learn from Haiti. 10 years. And in some areas, government may say, I think we have to use triage right off.
For parts of the country at risk, business as usual is no longer an option, and communities that will be rebuilt will need to adapt to the changing weather patterns. This means discouraging people from returning to danger zones and rebuilding homes, schools, and other infrastructure that can resist the more powerful typhoons in the future. The current practice after a calamity is to build tent cities and bunk houses as emergency shelter. It's a knee-jerk response to homelessness. But the National Anti-Poverty Commission, together with Habitat for Humanity, have initiated a campaign to provide sustainable housing with a model of reconstruction hinged on climate-resilient homes that generate employment for the community.
So what we want to do is to think of reconstruction not just in terms of constructing shelter, but reconstructing communities. The idea that we're providing details into, okay, is number one, people are already beginning to reconstruct on their own with no government help.
We're seeing that.
Yes. So we want to provide government help not only because it's nice, okay, but because with government help we can maybe steer the reconstruction in directions that, number one, minimize disaster risks. Okay. Number two, hopefully deal with tenure issues. And then if we're going to involve the community, we also want to involve them in actually doing the construction.
It's a reconstruction model Habitat for Humanity is familiar with. The global NGO has rebuilt communities hand in hand with the displaced in areas like tsunami-stricken Aceh in Indonesia and in quake-hit Bohol. The goal? To get people out of the streets or tent colonies as fast as possible and into decent homes.
In our experience, either it's a flood or a typhoon, they would need the basic materials. So we distribute what we call the shelter repair kits, so that each one can go to his place, and if their house is still standing but heavily damaged, let's say the roof was blown off, then you can use the GI sheets as your roofing materials. We have plywood for temporary walls. If unfortunately your house was totally washed out or it was totally destroyed, these materials are enough to make a makeshift house.
Costing just 15,000 pesos each, the shelter kits provide a better alternative to the overcrowded and unsanitary bunkhouses and tents. The long-term solution, however, is to build core houses in safe zones that can survive super typhoons and earthquakes at a cost of just 200,000 pesos for a 20 square meter single-story structure with toilet and bath. Habitat says they can have the first units ready in a month. When constructed, this is what the homes and community centers will look like. Low-hung with an aerodynamic concrete reinforced roof to resist winds up to 275 kilometers per hour. And walls made of bamboo mesh, sandwiched between cement plaster that, unlike hollow blocks, won't collapse easily in a strong quake.
So it's a function, I think, of good design, and then good materials, and then of course good workmanship. And I think all of that should combine.
The next step is getting locals to help Habitat's contractors and volunteers build theirs and their neighbors' homes.
These are people, and they have to make decisions in their life. And it's part of the process of reconstruction and rebuilding their own lives, so they are part of the decision-making process. So when that is the approach, they already have a contribution to their own house. Now, the second one is, we know that they are victims of disasters. They have no money. We also want them to earn something. So we will hire them to be part of the labor force under a Cash for Work program. And the government and some international agencies have the Cash for Work program.
The viability of efforts like that of Habitat for Humanity will rely heavily on government and private sector funding. That's why Habitat for Humanity has kicked off its campaign to raise money to fund 30,000 emergency shelter kits and 10,000 permanent core houses initially. But once the homes are built, another challenge remains: long-term employment, especially with livelihood like farming and fishing washed away by the flood. This is where volunteer tourism, or what's known as volunteerism, can help. It's an alternative livelihood program we saw for ourselves at Gawad Kalinga village at the foot of Mount Iriga in Camarines Sur. The Gawad Kalinga villagers here at the foot of Mount Iriga are always more than willing to open up their homes for you. But why impose on them when you can still live among them in the comfort of your own temporary home? Hello.
Hello, David. Welcome to GK Iriga.
Thank you, thank you.
Dito ka na sa amin magtira.
Dito ba? Yung bed and breakfast? Okay.
Okay.
Magpapaluto na lang ako.
Magpapaluto.
Okay. Sige. 2 guest houses were built to offer bed and breakfast services for visitors. The income from the rent is shared among the villagers.
Talagang
Locals who
tama ba?
sign up as cooks, cleaners, drivers, and tour guides also get a chance to earn extra for their services, and also from tips. It's not exactly a luxury resort, but it's an alternative attraction for the growing number of volunteers in the world, seeking the unaffected and authentic life of a rural village while volunteering their help. In the coming months and years, thousands of volunteerists and aid workers are expected to descend on places like Leyte, Samar, and other parts of the Visayas affected by Yolanda. And services like these will no doubt provide a lifeline to those who lost their livelihoods in the calamity. All tragedies create opportunities and a chance to learn from mistakes and start anew. Yolanda is a wake-up call, a reminder of the dangers of inertia and ignorance, a reminder of our responsibility to one another and to our earth.
The reality is that this is a slope. And some people are going to take on market leadership, geographical leadership, regional leadership, and others will fall by the wayside. That's the reality. As much as we do not want to accept poverty as a given, there will be new poverty. There will be new wealth. The baton will change hands. Our challenge, I think, is to make sure that there are more people who get it and who can move forward. And the number of people who are disadvantaged because they don't get it becomes less.
And that's all for this special edition of Executive Class. I'm David Beltran, encouraging you all to lend a helping hand. Thanks for watching.